Hello, everyone, and welcome to SCV Means Business. This is the podcast of the Santa Clarita Valley Economic Development Corporation. I'm Holly Schroeder, your host today, and with me again today is our favorite economist, Dr. Mark Schniepp of California Economic Forecast. Talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy generally, and also here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Welcome, Mark. Great to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Holly.
Great. So there's a whole lot to talk about. So we're filming this in the middle of April. Let's just timestamp that a little bit, April 19th, and because things seem to be moving really fast. So let's start on some better, gooder news around employment, which is, I think, in the last report you've shared with us, we've really recovered all of our jobs. That we went through the pandemic dip and everything, and unemployment right now is holding okay. So tell me a little bit about what's going on in the employment situation from your point of view.
Yeah, it's kind of universal within the region, within Southern California, certainly that employment is full. I mean, we are starting to see a few cracks occur, but for the most part, there's still lots of jobs openings that are unfilled, and unemployment rates are at rock bottom levels right now. So we really don't see any concern regarding it, but we have seen job openings decline from their peaks. So of course, their peaks were at unreasonable levels last summer. So those have come down, and we're starting to see, at least on the national level, because we don't have it regionally, that claims for unemployment are starting to rise. Not in any concerning level, but they are starting to go up again. And we're starting to see consumers now pull back just a little bit, too, on their spending. So a few little indications, of course, that all the softening that we've been warned about, is going to occur in 2023. Well, it is occurring now.
Yeah, and I think we all sort of predicted that could happen. And, so tell me more about the consumer, because when I go out, it still seems like there's a lot of people out and about. They go to restaurants. I see people at the store and stuff. Planes seem full. But I also hear all these things about what you just said about the consumer seems to be pulling back a little bit. And so how do I make sense of that? Because it seems conflicting to me.
Well, it's subtle. That's why. The changes so far is subtle. But if this is part of a trend, then they'll be less subtle as we go into the summer months. But California, so consumers are pulling back, although they really don't have a lot of good reasons to, because the stock market's still rising this year. I mean, the S&P is up 7 or 8%. NASDAQ's up even more, I think. And everybody's got a job. Everybody's been getting raises. Those raises haven't really kept pace in most cases with inflation, but nevertheless, people substitute out of the high expensive goods and into the lower ones, so they can kind of control the inflationary environment to some extent for their own households. So they've got decent income right now, and the stock market is doing okay. So that's why we don't see spending really coming down that much. But it is a little bit when we look at some of the broader areas. So look for that to possibly be an area of concern over the next 3 or 4 months. That's why we're not predicting recession for quarter 2. If there is going to be one, it'll likely be coming in quarter 3 of this year.
All right. So you think it's still a little bit off. We're not in it now. I hear some people saying, I think we're in it now. So you don't see that evidence of that's what's happening right now.
No. And the reason why is because the labor market needs to, a recession means that you have resources in the economy that are idle, unwanted idleness. It's not, unwanted. We don't have it in the labor markets. So you can't have a recession if the labor markets are still this tight. So no, I don't see that happening, but things can change. And so let's give it 3 or 4 or 5 months before we make that call.
So, So one of the things we talked about, a couple of times is that there were a lot of folks who left the labor market over the past few years. The Great Retirement, as it was dubbed by some, and people that maybe were going to exit for retirement or other reasons. Did it early, right? They didn't want to work from home. They didn't want to make the adjustments or whatever, or they were happy that their 401k went up or their housing went up, whatever it was. So is that sort of a permanent change to the size of the labor market, or is this temporary? What is how much softening can there be before we would have that slack in the system that you're talking about?
Well, okay, so you raise a lot of points here. In fact, when you talked about right at the beginning that we have recovered all the jobs in Santa Clarita, and for that matter, in many places in California now, that's really not the important news. The news is that we're at full employment. That means anybody that wants to work pretty much is working. The fact that we haven't recovered all the jobs really goes to the labor force issue you're addressing. It was very difficult to get to that point because people didn't want to work. Why? Because exactly what you said. There was accelerated retirements in 2020 and 2021 because housing prices were at an all-time high. The stock market was at an all-time high. People didn't want to deal with pandemic restrictions. And so, yeah, exactly everything that you said. So we had more people leave. So you're saying how's this all going to play out? Well, it's going to be an assimilative process. We're not going to get those people back very quickly. So we're going to have to wait for all the new Generation Z population to graduate out of high school and college and come into the labor force and start moving that higher again. So that's more gradual, that's more glacial. So yeah, we'll get back to that point and you'll see labor forces rise again. But right now they are much less than where they were pre-pandemic levels. So it's going to take an assimilative process. But the labor force being held down is one of the reasons why we don't look for the recession that's coming or near recession, whatever you want to call it, to really have a big impact on the labor market, simply because we just don't have enough people. So It's not going to hit the labor markets like it has in the past. And all the forecasts of how the unemployment rate rises in California are really pretty moderate during the recession that is being predicted. So it's really not going to create a lot of chaos or calamity for housing.
So it's really, we're going to see slower overall economic growth, right. But from a general person in their community, they may not feel it as acutely. Certainly nothing like what we saw in 2009, 2008, 9, et cetera.
We're not getting that indication at all yet.
Okay.
And California's got some exceptional things going for it. One of the big things is that China, this year opened completely back up, so all their people can travel. So you're going to start to see a lot more flights coming into California loaded with Chinese visitors. Mm-hmm. So that population, which has been essentially virtually absent the last two and a half years from California tourism, is going to inundate the visitor populations into California this summer. So that's going to provide a lot of offsetting growth to the resident pullback in spending.
Interesting. Yeah, people probably don't think so much about how much tourism is a part of the all of California, but especially Southern California economy.
Right. Then if this trade dispute along the West Coast ports ever gets resolved, which we believe it will, then that's going to cause, right now we're having a lot of shipments, tankers filled with containers that normally would go to Long Beach and LA. They're going through the Panama Canal to the East Coast ports because they fear a strike will doom their cargo. And so they're like risk averse, and it'll cost them a lot more to do that, but at least they'll be able to get their cargo unloaded and get back. Because of the threat of strike at the port. So if that can get resolved, then we'll start to see a lot more cargoes come in, and the logistics industry is going to just start flourishing like it was before the last 6 months when things have really tailed off. So that's another bonus for California, if we can resolve that. And then most of the manufacturing in California is aerospace and computer components and boards and semiconductors and design boards for the most part. And those two particular areas of manufacturing, I know that's kind of big, aerospace in
Absolutely.
Santa Cruz. Those are doing really well right now. So
yeah, our
that's
aerospace companies are happy.
Right. So that's going to offset a lot of possibly the slowness in manufacturing that we're seeing in other sub-industries. So I think California has sort of an advantage this year over other areas of the nation.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's good to hear. So, of course, the big stories so far this year have, the continuation of interest rates going up. And what does that mean for the economy? And then, of course, what's going on, its impact on, and then what happens consequently in the banking system. And obviously, we've had, bank failures for the, most significant bank failures in, decades. So that made a lot of news and made people nervous. But then it seems like now people are less nervous. At least that's what it seems like to me. What's the economy look like? What's an economist seeing that?
Well, the economists see the following. It's sort of a double-edged sword. Okay, or it's on one hand, this is happening, and on the other hand, this is happening. So on one hand, you're right. It appears that this bank default contagion is not going to occur, okay, among the regional banks. They seem to be on solid footing. There's no other shoes beyond, the last one was Credit Suisse and UBS, and it's really been relegated to Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank and maybe First Republic. Those were the three big PR. Okay, since then, nothing. It's been an eerie silence. But what has happened is the credit tightening. So on one hand, no big bank failure. On the other hand, credit tightening, which means credit crunch, which means banks are pulling back on their lending standards, or tightening the lending standards, pulling back on lending, and at a time which is not favorable to small business, because if we do start seeing this consumer slowdown of consumption, and remember, consumption is buying goods and services, and that's what small businesses are providing. So if they start to see a slowdown in their business, then they're going to need financing to get them through this lull, this slowdown, this quicksand period. So this isn't coming at a good time. We don't need small business failing because they can't get financing to push them through this slowdown here. So this could be, the shoe that will drop. That, and then we have all these office buildings that we're seeing rising vacancy, and apparently 50% of them or so are going to need to be refinanced in the next year or two. So we're going to need refinancing for commercial real estate. And so what's going to happen if banks are a lot more reticent to lend against these? So we don't want to see a major office building fire sale occur. That's not going to end well for anybody.
Right.
Over the next, particularly at the time when the economy is already near a tipping point. This could be, this really could define whether we have a mild recession, a very mild, if none, or a severe recession, depending upon how commercial real estate ends up with the credit crunch and the lending standards changing right now, because all these regional banks are extremely afraid of the regulatory environment and the scrutiny that they're going through from the FDIC now.
So tell me what indicators you're watching to help figure out which of those paths we're on.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at how much banks are still going to the discount window and borrowing against what they can through the discount window. So we're watching the volumes there. And then we're also looking at employment within the financial or banking sector in California, because if banks are pulling back on business, that's really going to be one of the first things that we see let go is financial employment, and we get that data monthly. So that's going to be a little more telling. And then we're also going to be watching how commercial real estate is doing going forward. Right now, it's not that bad, but we are seeing, as I said, vacancy rates rising because of the fact that remote work is now still so ingrained into the office cultures, and employers, because they still face lots of quits and a tight labor market, they kind of have to do what their employees want them to do in order to maintain them. So until all these sort of dynamics change, I don't know, commercial real estate is going to be fragile.
Yeah, they need all those dynamics sort of need to find their new water level, right? So where things balance out. Level. We're swishing around a little bit still. Yeah.
So, and this goes back to your point about the labor force. So once the labor force starts getting, and this is why I think it's going to take a couple of years, once the labor force starts getting back up to normal levels with the new populations coming in, Generation Z was a pretty big generation, as was the millennials, but Generation Z was smaller. But as those all start inundating the labor force, then we will start seeing a normalization occur. But it's going to happen gradually.
Right, they're just getting there, right?
Yeah, they're just getting there.
Yeah. So interest rates, have been going up, and obviously we just talked about the impact on banking. But I think a lot of people thought that was going to, make major changes in housing prices, and in some cases it has. But overall, I certainly probably not as much as many predicted, and maybe as I might have thought. So, talk to me a little bit about housing and what you're seeing there, both macro as well as here in Santa Clarita.
Yeah, well, Santa Clarita is actually doing pretty well, relative to the other parts of California. But there are many places in Southern California that are actually exceeding the statewide trend right now. And this is the subject of my newsletter currently in April. Are we facing another housing bubble? As everybody, as all the doom and gloomers are saying. And in fact, I start out the article with "The Sky is Falling" by Chicken Little. But we don't see that at all. Yes, prices have come down a little bit. And most of the reported prices come from Redfin or CoreLogic or multiple listing services or the California Association of Realtors. So they're reporting on what's getting transacted. And what's getting transacted right now is skewed to the lower end of the value, system. So we're seeing a lot more lower end property. And so that's causing the median price of what's selling to fall more than actually the value of real estate in general.
Interesting.
Okay, so we know that it's the mix of sales that is skewing prices down more than they should be in the reported basis. In Santa Clarita, I think the Santa Clarita median price for real estate reached its apex in July of last summer. It was nearly hit 800,000. Of course, Stevenson Ranch is a lot more, as we know. But whatever the case, that was for the greater region. And currently, I was looking at Zillow, and it's currently right around 750. So it really hasn't fallen much. And again, that's what's being transacted, not necessarily the value of your house. Because it's what's being transacted isn't adjusted for quality or location or size. So those things change. When we look at the indexes that do control for that, prices are down about 6 to 7%. California Association of Realtors, they can be down anywhere from 10 to 20%. And in the Bay Area, they've really been hit hard. They're down like 35%. So that's kind of where things are. And you asked me why this isn't going to be the same, or why isn't it going to be the same? Why is it different this time? I hate saying that because every time you say that, it ends up not being different. But what we end up seeing now is we still have mortgages that were made under very strict guidelines all these years. So those haven't loosened up. We don't have the liar loans anymore. We have down payments. There weren't two mortgages. There was only one. They've been fixed rate mortgages. They've been really low. So we don't have the adjustable rates anymore. So all of the lending conditions that kind of backfired back during the Great Recession and caused the housing bubble to implode, those aren't in place right now at all. We've got everybody, and pretty much everybody has equity in their homes as well. So even if they had to sell, even if the labor markets did implode, people didn't have money to make their mortgage payments and they had to sell, most of them could sell and wouldn't have to leave the house for foreclosure to the bank. And so things would be transacted and everything would kind of be a lot smoother than previously. So we don't see that happening this time. The seeds aren't there.
And inventories are really low. I mean, one of the things that, I hear from folks is, they've got this 3% mortgage that from when they bought or refinanced a few years ago. And they're like, why would I give that up and go somewhere where I'm going to have a 6% mortgage? Just because I'm going to have a higher payment. So there's like a cash flow element in people's, at least in their minds, I think.
Right. So because of that very attitude, inventory is near or at record lows in most jurisdictions that I've looked at in California. That's just it. There's no supply.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons that is also not lending to a major price fallout. You just don't have any supply. So it's the supply-demand fundamentals. We didn't have that in the Great Recession. We had tons of supply that caused prices to crash. No crashing is probably going to occur this time unless we get some unanticipated, event that really causes us to tip over hard. But we don't know what that is yet because it's unexpected.
Right. And we've had a few unexpected events thrown at us the past few years that hasn't tipped over. So
that's right.
All right. So let's take the last sector and maybe end on a little bit of what I think is a positive. And I was just telling you that we are seeing leasing in our industrial buildings continue to be strong. That the industrial market has been the bright spot of real estate, like an extra bright spot in the past few years, and helping us bring jobs to Santa Clarita. And I think that's really is a macro trend. What do you see going on in there? Although, I mean, it's crazy. Some of the lease rates have gone up so much. It's definitely does have a cost effect on our businesses.
Yeah, I think lease rates are at all-time record highs.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know that the office market was so fragile in this in the area. You would know because we're seeing vacancy rates rise sharply, say in Ventura County and in Orange County and in LA County and even in the Inland Empire. But there are particularly micro regions like Santa Clarita Valley, which we're not necessarily seeing that.
Okay.
There's still strong demand. Of course, you don't have a real big office market yet, but that certainly is coming. It's not like the industrial market is. Nevertheless, it's still doing relatively well. But you can't say that for the office market in general because of the remote worker issue that is keeping people away. Even though office employment is back up to near all-time highs, it's not getting into the office environment yet. So again, that's one of these things that has to normalize. I don't see this being anywhere near the problem in the Santa Clarita Valley that we're seeing elsewhere. So you're probably going to be insulated from that to some extent. But again, that's something to watch.
Yeah, and industrial is staying strong, and now we're facing limited inventory there as well.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, after Needham Ranch, now you need another ranch.
We're working on it, but we've got a little lag in our timing on some things. So Mark, final conclusions, takeaways, key things that people should be watching as we are in a pretty fluid environment.
Well, I'm worried about inflation. We're in a deflationary environment now. Things peaked back in the summer. And so we've had good reports on inflation ever since, but it's not coming down really fast enough. We hope there won't be a relapse in that. Congress just does not seem to want to do the right thing and stop spending, although the House seems to be hell bent on it with refusing to raise the debt ceiling right now. So we'll see how that goes going forward. But we can't have Congress spending any more money because that's just going to fuel inflation. So we need inflation to come down. And so the reason I say that is because we don't want to be ambushed with any higher interest rate increases by the Fed. And the Fed is on a mission to control inflation at all costs. So they'll continue raising rates as long as inflation isn't cooperating. So we need inflation to come down as quickly as possible. That will cause the Fed to stop raising rates and maybe even cause a rate cut later on in the year. Probably not, but it'll probably won't occur until 2024. And so that will really help the economy start getting back on track. So we want, again, inflation is a big issue right now. So we're watching that very carefully. And then, of course, we're watching the commercial real estate issue that has potential to really get ugly. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully policymakers will be able to step in and possibly do something to ameliorate the situation. But again, that's another area that we're watching closely. And then, of course, we're watching the labor markets. Because as long as the labor markets don't tip over, we won't really, the recession will be mild or non-existent.
Okay. All right. Well, there's a lot of things to watch there, and we'll be checking in again in a few months, and of course at our Economic Outlook event on September 15th. So, Mark, thanks again for joining me today. Thanks everybody for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time on SCB Means Business.